I only needed somewhere safe to sleep.
Here.
Then I found what they had hidden beneath that machine.
No family, no room, no promise of work, just one canvas satchel and $11.63 she had counted beneath a railway awning before dawn. And with that money, she bought a forgotten walnut gun cabinet joiner's barn outside Grand Rapids in Kent County, Michigan, abandoned from local maps since 1937. Half the roof sagged toward the north wall. 3 window frames stood open to the weather. The county condemned it on October 4, 1951, with demolition planned for spring. But beneath the massive cast-iron drill press buried under packed earth and hidden behind a hollow core untouched for decades, something waited that would alter the shape of her life. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Wren Ellison had been measuring her whole life without knowing it. At 7, she learned how many floorboards lay between the dormitory bed assigned to her and the washroom at the end of the girls' home corridor. At 10, she could tell which stair would complain under a matron's shoe. By 14, she knew how long winter light remained on the west windows after supper. Her mother had left no forwarding address, only a brown wool coat too large for a child and a note saying she would return when she had work enough for 2. She never did. The closest thing Wren had to a father was Amos Bell, the maintenance man who came through the basement door each Saturday carrying a dented green lunch pail and smelling faintly of linseed oil. Amos had once fitted cabinets in a Grand Rapids shop where black walnut was milled into tall sporting cases with glass doors thick enough to survive years of use and brass locks strong enough to keep rifles from curious hands. By the time Wren knew him, arthritis had swollen 2 knuckles on his right hand, but his eye remained exact. On Saturday afternoons, after he repaired radiator valves and sticky sash cords, he let Wren sit beside his bench. He taught her to read grain before touching a plane to wood. "Look twice along the board," he would say. "Walnut tells you where it wants the blade." He showed her how a cabinet door had to be square before glass ever entered it, because glass forgave nothing. A 1/16 of an inch wrong at one corner became pressure at another. Pressure became a crack. He taught her to mark mortises with a knife instead of a fat pencil, to fit a hinge without bruising the surrounding wood, and to test a brass lock 3 times before trusting it. Some Saturdays, he brought scraps of black walnut no longer than her forearm. Wren practiced cutting tiny rabbits into their edges while snow pressed white against the basement windows. Once, after she ruined a narrow rail by hurrying the chisel, Amos turned the piece in his hands. The dangerous thing is rarely the iron. Wren waited. It is the hand that forgets the lock. She remembered that because Amos was not speaking only about cabinets. He died during her 16th winter. A matron told her between breakfast and laundry duty, then asked her to finish folding sheets. By Monday, Amos's bench had been cleared. His sharpening stones, brass dividers, wooden mallet, hinge gauges, and a small walnut lockbox he had once promised to show her properly were gone. The home director said they had belonged to the institution. Wren did not argue. Director Margaret Vale disliked disorder more than cruelty. Her office smelled of starch, carbon paper, and the lavender sachet she kept in every drawer. Keys hung from her belt in a measured row. She corrected crooked picture frames while girls spoke to her. No voice was raised in her presence because she never needed to raise hers. She believed rules became kinder when followed exactly. Birthdays were written in blue ink inside a black ledger. At 18, a resident left. No exceptions, on the morning of March 12, 1951, Wren dressed before the bell. Her possessions fit inside Amos's old canvas tool satchel, though the tools themselves were long gone. She carried it downstairs and found her mother standing near Director Vale's desk. Wren had not seen her in 9 years. The brown coat was different. The silence was not. Director Vale placed one brass key on the desk, though there was no reason for Wren to have it. "You are 18 now. This is no longer home." Exactly 8 words. Wren looked at her mother. The woman pressed both hands around the handle of her handbag. She did not step forward. Director Vale opened the front door. Cold March air entered first. Wren picked up the satchel, passed the brass key without touching it, and walked out while the door closed behind her with the careful click of a lock properly seated. For 6 weeks, she learned the geography of places that tolerated a person only until morning. In Grand Rapids, she slept 2 nights behind a bakery near Division Avenue, where warm yeast came through the brick before sunrise. She spent 40 cents on coffee and bread and washed her face in the public library restroom. In Muskegon, she found one night beneath the rear stair of a boarding house, curled around the satchel while lake wind rattled the ash cans. Her money fell from $11.63 to $8.17, then $5.92, then $3.41. She walked when she could and rode buses only when distance defeated her shoes. One wet night in Holland, Michigan, she slept upright inside the unlocked vestibule of a church until a custodian found her before dawn. He did not ask for her story. He handed her half a cheese sandwich and pointed toward the side door, rains easing east, that was all. She remembered him. By late April, the soles of her shoes had begun separating at the toes. She tied one with cotton string and returned to Grand Rapids because libraries were warm, librarians rarely asked questions, and newspapers could be read without purchasing them. On April 26th, Wren sat at a long oak table beneath a green-shaded lamp and opened the classified section. She read boarding rooms first, too expensive, factory work next, most required references. Then, near the bottom of a county disposal notice, she saw 8 narrow lines. Abandoned joiner's barn. Former sporting cabinet works, township parcel. Unsafe structure, contents included. Deed by quitclaim. Purchaser assumes all liability and removal obligations. Minimum consideration $2. Wren read the notice again, then once more. The word walnut appeared in the description of the interior fittings. Her thumb stopped there. She had $2.26. At the reference desk, she asked for a county road map and traced the route west of Grand Rapids with one finger. The property stood beyond the last reliable bus stop, near an old furniture district road where several small workshops had vanished during the Depression. The librarian, a woman with silver spectacles on a chain, watched Wren copy the address. "That building is condemned. I know. You planning to salvage it?" Wren folded the paper. "I'm planning to see it." That afternoon, she spent 21 cents on bread, kept the nickel she received in change, and bought a bus ticket as far as her remaining money allowed. By dusk, the city had begun falling away behind her. Somewhere beyond those last paved streets stood a broken barn worth almost nothing, built for a craft Amos Bell had once placed carefully into her hands. And beneath its heaviest machine, the ground had been keeping a secret. The bus left Wren at a crossroads 6 miles short of the township line just after 4 in the afternoon. She stepped down with Amos Bell's canvas satchel in one hand and the folded county advertisement inside her coat. The driver shut the door, ground the gears, and disappeared east beneath a low ceiling of April cloud. For several minutes she walked beside muddy tire ruts with no house in sight, only black fields, drainage ditches bright with standing water, and last year's corn stalks clicking together in the wind. By dark, she had covered perhaps 4 miles. The temperature fell to 34 degrees. Wren found an open hay barn set back from the road, climbed through a loose side door, and slept beneath a horse blanket that smelled of dust and old rain. Mice moved somewhere behind the grain bins. Each time she woke, she listened for an owner coming with a lantern. No one came. At first light, she folded the blanket exactly as she had found it and walked the remaining distance with wet shoes. The township gathered around one broad road running toward Grand Rapids. Wren passed Van Doren Hardware with galvanized pails hanging outside, Mabel's Lunch with steam whitening the front glass, Quetzier Feed and Seed under a faded green awning, Baxter's Barber Shop with one striped pole that no longer turned, and DeWitt Funeral Rooms where a black Packard stood polished beneath a maple tree. Nobody stopped her. That felt like permission. The county clerk kept a small satellite office beside the township hall, a square brick building with limestone steps worn hollow at the center. Wren entered at 9:12. Behind the counter sat a woman whose gray hair had been twisted into such a firm coil that 3 black pins showed plainly above her left ear. A brass nameplate read, Mrs. Eleanor Pruitt, Deputy County Clerkmers. Pruitt looked first at Wren's shoes, then at the satchel, then at the folded notice. You came about the Bell parcel, hope for the joiner's barn. Mrs. Pruitt removed her spectacles. You understand the roof has been declared structurally unsound? Yes, ma'am. You understand there is no electricity connected? Yes, ma'am. You understand the well has not been tested since 1938? Yes, ma'am. You understand the county will not reimburse you if the structure fails? Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Pruitt studied her long enough that the clock behind the counter clicked twice. $2. Wren reached into her coat. She placed 2 worn $1 bills on the counter. The clerk did not touch them immediately. How old are you? 18. That was not one of the legal questions. No, ma'am. Something almost changed in Mrs. Pruitt's face. Almost. She opened a drawer. The papers took 23 minutes. Wren signed where a blue pencil cross had been marked, then again beneath a paragraph stating that all contents, fixtures, refuse, machinery, hazards, and unknown encumbrances transferred with the property. Mrs. Pruitt pressed a heavy brass stamp into an ink pad and brought it down on the deed with a sound like a small door closing. There, she gave Wren precise directions. West on Leonard Street until the pavement narrowed. North on an old furniture road locals still called Turner Cut, though newer maps gave it another name. Past a drainage creek, then a stand of walnut trees. The property lay behind a broken fieldstone wall. Wren folded the deed once. Mrs. Pruitt did not release it. Her eyes had stopped on the signature, Ellison. Wren waited. That your family name? It's the name I was given. The clerk looked toward the back room as though checking whether anyone else could hear. Amos Bell ever mean anything to you? Wren's fingers tightened around the counter edge. Yes. What was he to you? He taught me woodwork. Mrs. Pruitt leaned back. For the first time that morning, the office became entirely quiet. Amos Bell worked at that place. Wren did not answer. Not as owner. Not by the time I knew of it. My father hauled fittings from shops around Grand Rapids before the war. Brass hinges, locks, Belgian glass sometimes. He said Bell was one of the last young joiners trained there before it closed. Wren looked down at the deed. He never told me. Men like Amos did not always tell what had gone. Mrs. Pruitt turned the document over. On the rear was a faint typed property history. One line had been underlined decades earlier. Bell, Amos J., apprentice joiner, 1934 and 1937. Wren read it twice. The office seemed to shift around that small sentence. Amos had taught her on Saturday afternoons in a basement beneath a girls' home, using scraps he carried in his lunch pail. He had never said those hands had learned their work inside the building she had just purchased for $2. Mrs. Pruitt finally released the deed. Your first $1 goes into the county account, and the second? A dry smile appeared. County says $1 consideration. Township says $2 minimum. Until they settle the bookkeeping, I keep the other in my drawer. She opened the top drawer and laid one of Wren's bills flat beneath a paperweight. Government can be patient. Wren almost smiled. Outside, the sky had cleared enough to show a pale strip of blue. She walked west. Turner Cut was narrower than the county map suggested, paved at first, then patched gravel pressed between shallow ditches. An elderly man splitting kindling beside a farmhouse lifted 2 fingers from the handle of his axe as she passed. His dog did more. A red hound came to the fence, barked once, then followed her along the property line until an invisible boundary stopped him. Beyond the farmhouse stood the walnut trees. They were not in leaf yet. Their dark limbs rose against the afternoon sky like careful joinery, each branch dividing from another with an order that looked stronger the longer she studied it. Then she saw the barn. It stood 50 yards back from the road. The building was smaller than the word barn had led her to imagine, perhaps 28 feet long and 18 feet wide, framed in heavy timber and sided with weathered pine over a low fieldstone foundation. The roof was steep, once cedar shingled, now patched with tar paper and rusted sheet metal. A narrow brick chimney leaned slightly east. Above the double front doors hung a wooden sign. Most of the paint had peeled away. Wren wiped lichen from it with her sleeve. Bell and heart-sporting cabinets, joinery and glass. She stood beneath the name Bell for a long moment. Then she pushed the door. It moved 3 inches and stopped. Something scraped behind it. Wren put her shoulder against the wood. The obstruction surrendered with a brittle crack, and a broken chair leg slid across the floor. Cold air came out first, then walnut. Not fresh sawdust, not the bright smell of a newly planed board. This was deeper. Dry wood, machine oil, mouse nesting, rust, old ash, and the faint bitter sweetness of walnut dust that had settled into floor cracks before Wren was born. She stepped inside. Under her shoes, glass answered. She froze. A broken window pane lay scattered across the entry, each shard covered in enough dust to soften its edges. Wren moved carefully around it. The front room had once been a display space. 3 towering walnut cabinets stood against the wall, their doors missing or hanging crooked from heavy brass hinges. One still held a pane of thick glass clouded by decades of grime. When Wren touched it with one finger, the glass gave a low trembling note in its frame. She tasted iron in the cold air where she had bitten the inside of her lip without noticing. Somewhere overhead, water dripped. Once, then again. The roof leak had filled an enamel basin left beneath it, and the slow drops struck with the patience of a clock. She crossed into the rear room. This was the shop. The light entered through broken windows and long gray bars. A joiner's bench stood under one wall. Rusted clamps hung above it. There were tall racks for timber, a foot-powered grinding wheel, and beneath the central roof beam a massive cast-iron drill press bolted to the floor. Wren stopped there. The machine was taller than she was. Its column had the broad blackened weight of something built when iron was expected to outlive the men who used it. The belt wheels were still in place. The table carried half-moon scars from drills that had gone too deep. She laid a hand against the column. Cold passed instantly into her palm. Nothing moved, nothing gave. For the first time since March 12th, Wren stood somewhere she could close a door from the inside. That evening she found a broom without a handle, pushed the worst glass away from one dry corner, and ate the remaining bread from her satchel. There was no lamp. After sunset, the rooms disappeared quickly. She lay on her coat with the satchel beneath her head. The building shifted around her. Roof boards ticked as the temperature fell. Wind entered through one broken sash and moved across the floor with a faint whistle. A mouse worked somewhere inside a wall. Once, something heavier crossed the roof, paused above her, then moved away. Wren did not sleep for nearly an hour. She listened instead, not for a matron, not for a custodian, not for someone coming to tell her she had no right to remain. Near midnight, she reached beside her and touched the folded deed. The paper was still there, so was the building. It leaked, it leaned. Its windows were broken, its chimney uncertain, and its floor carried the dirt of 14 abandoned years. But the door had a bolt. Wren rose in the dark, slid it into place, and tested it once with both hands. Then she tested it again. Sometimes the strongest wood is chosen simply to build a beautiful box that locks the most dangerous things safely behind glass. By the third morning, Wren knew which floorboards complained before her full weight reached them. The board beside the front display case gave one dry click. 2 near the back wall groaned together. A narrow plank beside the drill press stayed silent no matter where she stepped. She learned the well next. The hand pump behind the barn coughed rust-colored water for nearly 2 minutes before running clear enough to fill a tin cup. She boiled the first 3 buckets anyway. The outhouse leaned toward a sumac thicket 20 yards beyond the walnut trees. Its crescent moon cutout split neatly through the middle, but the floor remained sound. These were small facts. Small facts made a place survivable. On the 4th day, she walked back toward the township with a list folded into her pocket. Van Doren hardware smelled of kerosene, hemp rope, stove blacking, and the mineral dust of 100 paper sacks. Behind the counter stood a broad man with a scar cutting through his left eyebrow so cleanly it looked drawn with a ruler. He watched Wren place 3 coins on the glass. "What are you trying to save? A chimney first. That bad? I can see daylight where I should not." He nodded once. Name, Wren Ellison. His eyes paused at the surname, but he asked nothing. Henry Van Doren. Wren already knew that from the lettering on the window. She showed him the county deed. Henry read enough to understand the situation, then pushed 2 of her coins back. "I can open you the ledger account. I have no wages. I did not ask that. I may not be able to pay quickly, then pay slowly." He took a small ruled book from beneath the counter and wrote her name across the first page. No luxuries. I do not need luxuries. Everybody says that before lamp oil. From a shelf near the stove, he handed her a worn booklet with a gray paper cover. Home Repair for Farm and Shop Buildings, 1947 edition. Free. I can pay for it later. You cannot. I said free. Wren carried home a chimney brush for $1.35, 20 feet of rope for 48 cents, stove cement for 31 cents, a pound of cut nails for 22 cents, lamp oil for 19 cents, and 2 panes of salvage glass Henry priced together at 75 cents. Those numbers entered the hardware ledger beside her name. She read the chimney chapter that night, then again in the morning. The brick chimney rose from the rear workroom through the roof line. Wren first covered the stove opening with a damp cloth, tied one end of the rope to the wire chimney brush, then climbed the exterior roof only as far as the lower slope allowed before deciding the rotten shingles would not hold her. She changed the method. From inside, she removed the short stovepipe section beneath the flue, fed the brush upward in short strokes, and worked it against the clay-lined throat with the rope doubled back through a wooden guide. Black flakes fell immediately. Then thicker pieces. Creosote came down in hard glazed scales, some curled like burned bark, followed by soot so fine it found its way beneath her collar and into the corners of her eyes. She worked 3 hours before lunch, another 2 after. On the second day, the brush finally passed through without catching. Wren swept the debris into a metal pail and carried it outside. Nearly half a bucket. She stood looking at it. One careless fire beneath that much buildup could have turned the chimney into a torch. Before sunset, she sealed 2 cracked joints with stove cement, waited for the material to skin, then laid 3 pieces of dry maple kindling beneath a twist of newspaper. The first flame seemed too small to matter. It climbed anyway. Smoke lifted cleanly. No backdraft, no gray ribbon spilling into the room. Wren held one hand near the stovepipe and watched the fire settle into itself. That evening, she boiled potatoes in the same enamel pot she used for water, mashed them with salt Henry had included without writing it in the ledger, and fried 1 egg in a blackened skillet found beneath the bench. She ate, sitting on the floor. It was the first hot meal she had cooked for herself in 6 weeks. Afterward, she began learning what the rear shop had kept. Not everything deserved saving. Rain had ruined stacks of veneer near the north wall. Mice had nested inside cardboard boxes of fittings. Several steel tools had rusted past use, but some things remained. A 24-inch wooden jointer plane lay beneath the main bench, its iron wrapped in oily cloth. 3 cabinetmaker's clamps hung from forged hooks. A hand-cranked mortising machine stood against the wall with its chisel missing but its gears intact. There was a brass-backed tenon saw with 2 teeth broken near the heel, a shallow drawer of loose escutcheons and tiny lock plates, a glass cutter with a rosewood handle, and a narrow rack holding 6 lengths of black walnut so dark beneath the dust that they looked almost purple. Wren touched those boards last. She scraped one thumbnail lightly across the end grain. Solid, dry, waiting. The drill press stood apart from everything. She had noticed it on the first day because its weight dominated the room. But now that the floor was clearer, something about its position troubled her. The machine was bolted to a rectangular cast-iron base. 4 bolts, except one bolt head was newer than the others. Not new, just less old. Wren crouched. She tapped the base with the wooden handle of a screwdriver. The left side gave a dense iron knock, the front gave the same. The right side answered differently. Hollow. She struck it again. Hollow. Wren sat back on her heels. The county notice had said contents included. It had not said altered machinery. She tested the weight before touching the bolts. The drill press should have been immovable. She leaned both shoulders into the column. Nothing. Then she wedged a length of oak beneath one corner of the base and used a block as a fulcrum. The left edge resisted completely. The right edge rose perhaps 1/8 of an inch, not enough to move, enough to prove the load was uneven. She returned with the lamp. Near the rear of the column, beneath a coat of hardened grease, she found a circular seam, 6 inches across. She cleaned it with kerosene and a rag. The circle was not iron, it was wood-painted black. Cedar. Wren worked a thin putty knife around the edge. The disc shifted. A dry scent escaped from behind it, sharp and clean even after all those years. She stopped, then removed the disc slowly. Inside the hollow drill press column was a length of waxed canvas tied with linen cord. Wren did not pull it immediately. She reached in first with 2 fingers and felt along the cavity. More cloth, several bundles, one narrow wooden object. She cleared the workbench before taking anything out. The first package contained tools, not ordinary abandoned shop tools, kept tools, a pair of fine brass dividers, a small dovetail saw wrapped in wool, 3 chisels with boxwood handles, their edges greased, a cabinet maker's marking gauge with an ebony fence, each had initials cut discreetly into the wood. A.B. Wren sat down. She did not need anyone to tell her what those letters meant. The second package contained raw material. 2 carefully waxed pieces of figured black walnut, 4 brass hinges no longer than her thumb, 1 tiny mortised lock, and a rectangle of old glass wrapped in felt. The third was heavier, a tin document box, locked. Wren searched the canvas. A key had been sewn into the hem. She cut 2 stitches. The lock opened with 1 reluctant turn. Inside lay envelopes, a small ledger bound in dark leather, and money wrapped in paper bands gone yellow at the edges. Wren did not count it at first. She lifted 1 bundle, $20 bills, older designs than any she had handled. Another packet held tens. Beneath them were cloth bags that clicked when moved. Coins. She closed the box, opened it again. Nothing changed. By late afternoon, she had carried everything from the drill press cavity to the bench except 1 final wrapped object wedged at the bottom. It was a miniature cabinet, black walnut, 14 inches tall. Wren held it beneath the window. The proportions were nearly perfect. 2 miniature glass doors met at the center beneath a brass lock. Tiny mortise and tenon joints held the frame. The cornice had been shaped with 3 restrained beads, no decoration wasted, and the back was joined with thin floating panels that allowed the wood to move with humidity. She turned the key. The doors opened evenly. Inside rested the dark leather ledger. On its first page, written in faded ink, were 4 words. Ledger of safekeeping. Wren began counting only after dusk. She made columns, bills first, then coins. She counted once, then again, then a third time because Amos had taught her that accuracy began where excitement ended. $27, $1,800 exactly, not approximately, not including the coins. The coin bags held Morgan silver dollars, Walking Liberty half dollars, Indian head cents, and a smaller group of gold Liberty head pieces wrapped individually in tissue. At the bottom of the last bag lay a military medal suspended from a faded ribbon. The bronze had darkened almost brown. On the reverse, a date had been scratched by hand. Wren placed it beside the miniature cabinet. There was also an envelope. Her name was not written on it. No name was. Only, for the one who finds and keeps this place. She stared at those words until the lamp flame shortened. Then she put the letter down unopened. There had been too many discoveries in one day. She needed one thing that did not require understanding. Outside, evening had settled blue over the drainage creek. Wren walked beyond the walnut trees and stood where meltwater widened around reeds before disappearing beneath the road culvert. A muskrat crossed once, leaving a narrow V on the dark surface. The town lights were too far away to see. Behind her, 1 lamp burned in the joiner's barn. $27,800 waited inside. So did Amos Bell's tools. So did a letter written to a stranger. Wren folded her arms against the cold and watched the water move until she could hear nothing else. Sometimes the strongest wood is chosen simply to build a beautiful box that locks the most dangerous things safely behind glass. At first light, Wren carried the envelope to the front room and sat beneath the least broken window. She had seen the handwriting before, not the exact words, but the narrow, upright letters, the careful loops, the way a capital B leaned forward as though already reaching toward the next word. Amos had labeled tool drawers that way in the basement of the girl's home. Her thumb rested on the sealed edge, then she opened it. My dear one, whoever you are, if you are reading this, then you have opened what we meant to remain closed until someone patient enough found it. My name is Amos Bell. In March of 1936, Dr. Samuel Ortega at St. Mary's Hospital in Grand Rapids told me the growth in my left lung was malignant and that I should put my affairs in order. I did not do so quickly. Joiner's distrust rushed work. Our family came to this trade in 4 generations. Nathaniel Bell, born 1848 in Ontario, crossed into Michigan in 1871 and made walnut cases for sporting merchants in Grand Rapids. His son Isaac, born 1873, learned glass fitting and brass lockwork and opened this shop with Silas Hart in 1899. I, Elias, born 1896, inherited Isaac's bench and the habit of measuring twice before cutting once. My son Amos, born 1918, began here as an apprentice when he was 16. The trade closed on September 17, 1937. There's been more than 30 years of silence since then by the time I expect anyone honest to find this. My brother Thomas did not come home from France in 1918. The metal in the box belonged to him. He was 23. After that, our family made fewer display cases and more locking cabinets. That was not because we became afraid of iron. We became more respectful of what people failed to secure. If you mean to work walnut, do not force it dry beside a stove. Keep the boards near 6 to 8% moisture before final fitting. Warm hide glue gently, never above about 145 degrees Fahrenheit, and use roughly 1 part dry glue to 2 parts water before adjusting by feel. Let a fitted mortise rest overnight before trimming the last whisper from it. When glazing heavy doors, bed the glass evenly and allow the putty skin time before painting. A locked cabinet must close without being shoved. If it needs force, the joinery is wrong. The money here came from years of work, sale by sale, repair by repair. It was kept because a shop can disappear faster than a skill, and a skill can disappear faster than a person expects. Spend none of it merely because you found it. Use only what helps the work continue. Inheritance is not the money. It is knowing how to sharpen a blade before blaming the wood. It is understanding why a lock must work even when nobody is watching. It is leaving the bench cleaner than you found it. Amos was always gentle with damaged things. If he is still alive when this is found, tell him I knew he would carry the work farther than I could. If he is gone, then perhaps he already has. Behind the back door, beneath the 3rd walnut tree from the west corner, you will find a small stone marked with our cabinetmaker's compass. That mark was Nathaniel's. We used it when a piece had passed final inspection. Keep the tools dry, keep the glass supported. Do not hurry, old wood. The house is not empty. It has been waiting. You are welcome here. Elias Nathaniel, Bell, June 4. 1936, Wren finished the letter. Then she began again. The second reading took longer. At the closing, she held the page close enough to see where the pen had paused before the final date. There was a darkened spot in the paper beside Amos's name, no larger than the head of a nail. She folded the letter along its original creases. Not new ones. The old folds knew where to go. For several minutes she sat with both hands resting over the envelope. Then she stood. Behind the back door, rain had softened the yard overnight. Wren counted the walnut trees from the west corner. 1, 2, 3. At the base of the 3rd, moss covered a low stone almost completely. She knelt and worked the green growth loose with her fingernails. A mark appeared beneath it, a compass, not the schoolroom kind. A cabinetmaker's divider opened above a small square, both carved with 3 simple cuts. Wren traced the lines. The stone had been placed deliberately, level with the earth. Where someone who did not know to look would have walked over it for years, she did not dig beneath it. The letter had not told her to, that mattered. Back inside, she chose one object from the packages, a small brass and glass bench lamp. The fuel reservoir still held a finger's depth of old oil, unusable now, so she cleaned it, trimmed the stiff wick, and filled it from the bottle she had bought at Van Doren Hardware. She struck a match. The wick caught slowly. A narrow yellow flame rose behind the glass chimney. For the first time in decades, an object from the Bell workbench gave light again. Wren placed it beside the miniature cabinet. As evening came, she began remembering people by what their hands had done. The church custodian in Holland had handed her half a cheese sandwich without asking why she was sleeping in a vestibule. The silver-spectacled librarian had allowed her to sit beneath the green lamp for hours and had found the correct county map without making Wren explain why her shoes were wet. Mrs. Pruitt had kept one of the $2 bills in her desk instead of laughing at a girl buying a condemned building. Henry Van Doren had written her name into a credit ledger when she had nothing worth calling collateral. None of them had changed the world. Each had changed 1 hour. Sometimes that was enough to make the next hour possible. Before we move on, think of one small kindness someone once gave you when they had no obligation to help. Maybe it was a meal, a ride, a warm room, or simply a person who chose not to ask a humiliating question. If you remember one, tell us in the comments. Small kindnesses deserve to be kept somewhere. That night, Wren wrapped Amos Bell's letter in waxed cloth. She placed Amos's dividers, marking gauge and dovetail saw beside her sleeping place. The miniature cabinet sat within arm's reach. Before lying down, she checked its tiny brass lock once, then once more. The first real snow came on December 3rd. 4 inches fell before dawn and remained on the north slope of the roof, making every sag and broken shingle easier to read. Wren stood in the yard with the repair manual tucked beneath her coat and counted rafters through the missing sections. She had already read the roofing chapter 3 times. The barn measured roughly 28 by 18 feet with 2 steep roof planes and enough damaged cedar to make patching dishonest. Her calculation came to about 12 squares of replacement coverage once waste was included, 2 rolls of roofing felt and nearly 25 pounds of nails. Henry Van Doren stared at the figures. You measured the overhang twice. He went into the stockroom and returned carrying a roofing hatchet with 1 polished cheek and a handle darkened by decades of hands. My brother's. Wren did not reach for it immediately. He died 8 years ago. Tool should work. That afternoon, a man named Walter Decker arrived at the barn in a wool cap with 1 ear flap missing. He had roofed houses for 37 years. I heard you were climbing alone. I was planning to. No. I cannot pay you. I did not ask. They worked 11 days. Walter showed her how to sister a weakened rafter by bolting sound timber alongside the old member rather than pretending rot could be nailed solid. He snapped chalk lines so the shingle courses stayed true even when the roof beneath them wandered. Wren learned his 3-stroke rhythm with the hatchet. Set, dot drive seat on the 4th day, Walter stopped beside her. That nail's proud. Wren looked. It stood perhaps 1/16 high. Pull it. She did. By mid-December, new felt lay tight beneath straight courses. The weak rafters had sisters beside them, and rain could no longer choose its own entrance. Wren stood below after sunset while snow began again. Nothing dripped inside. January exposed what firelight had hidden. Several chimney bricks had begun spalling, their outer faces flaking away in thin red shells. Mortar near the roofline turned to powder beneath Wren's fingertip. She did not smear modern cement over it. The manual warned against trapping moisture inside old masonry. Henry helped her find hydraulic lime and fire clay, and Wren mixed roughly 3 parts lime mortar to 1 part fire clay where heat demanded it, keeping the batches small enough to use before they stiffened. The work took 3 weeks. Most afternoons stayed in the 20s Fahrenheit. She raked failed joints by hand, dampened the brick before repointing, and pressed fresh mortar deep enough to bond instead of merely covering the surface. Every 15 minutes her bare fingers went numb. Gloves were warmer but too clumsy for the narrow joints, so she worked until sensation left, stepped inside, held her hands near the stove without touching it, then returned. One morning a repaired corner cracked. She cut it out completely and began again. Late in January, Walter Decker came to watch the test fire. Wren started with newspaper and dry maple, then kindling. Then 1 split log. Smoke rose immediately, no spill at the collar, no gray stain along the ceiling. Outside, the chimney drew a clean vertical plume into the winter air. Walter watched it for a while. That'll do. Wren kept watching longer. The floor came next because there was no point setting furniture on dirt ground into wood. Most of the original boards were white pine, wide and soft with age, fastened by hand-cut rosehead nails whose dark heads sat slightly irregular beneath a century of wear. Wren refused to replace sound planks merely because they were scarred. She reset the loose nails by hand, patched 2 rotten sections with reclaimed pine, and rented a random orbit sander from Van Doren Hardware for $14 a day. Henry pointed at the machine. "Do not chase dents. I know, you will." He was right once, only once. She made 3 passes. 80 grit first, slowly enough to remove grime without hollowing the old boards, then 120, then 220. Dust collected in the folds of her clothes and turned the inside of her nose gray. When she wiped the first section clean, the floor changed beneath the rag. What had looked brown and dead became dark honey. After the first oil coat, the color deepened toward mahogany around the old nail heads. She applied 3 coats in all, thin and deliberate, then gave the final coat 48 hours to cure before walking across it in socks. There was one bad morning. Nothing broke, no tool failed. Wren simply stood in the doorway holding the sander cord and could not make herself begin. So she walked to the marsh. A great blue heron stood in shallow water among dead reeds, motionless except for the wind moving the feathers along its neck. Wren sat on a cold log until noon. She did no work that day. The next morning she returned to the floor. 8 windows remained in the barn. 3 had no glass at all. 4 carried cracked panes held together by dirt, old putty, and habit. The 8th contained one original pane, wavy and faintly green, dated in a penciled note inside the sash to 1788. Wren preserved it. She removed that sash first, laid it flat on padded boards, and touched neither glass nor glazing until she understood how the old pane had been bedded, the other windows taught her by failure. Her first line of DAP 33 glazing putty was too thick. She scraped it away. The second was too thin at the corners. She did that one again, too. By the 4th sash, her putty knife moved in one continuous angle, pressing a clean bevel between wood and glass so water would shed rather than sit. Several sash cords had rotted through. Wren replaced them with 1/4-inch cotton cord, feeding each line over the pulley and tying a figure-8 knot at the counterweight before lowering it carefully into the pocket. The windows began moving again. Not perfectly, honestly. On the last one, she fitted the lower sash, checked the meeting rails, and worked the lock until both halves seated without strain. Outside, February light rested pale on the walnut trees. A chickadee landed on the nearest branch. It tilted its head once toward the glass. Wren stood perfectly still with one hand resting on the sash. Then the bird lifted away. By late February, the walls looked worse because the roof no longer leaked enough to excuse them. Original horsehair plaster still clung to hand-split oak lath in broad islands, but 3 patches near the chimney failed in succession. The first cracked overnight. The second sagged away from the lath. The third dried too quickly beside the stove and powdered beneath her thumb. Henry Van Doren found an old burlap bag of horsehair in his storeroom. My father kept everything. Wren mixed lime plaster slowly, working the damp hair through it until the fibers spread instead of clumped. She pressed a scored scratch coat through the lath first, forcing small keys behind the oak strips. When that firmed, she laid a 3/8-inch brown coat and waited 72 hours before touching it again. The finished coat went on 1/8 inch thick, not smooth enough to look new, smooth enough to belong. At the chimney wall, Wren rested the trowel against her knee and looked at the pale patches drying among work done by hands long gone. These patches will hold another 100 years. Then she washed the trowel before the lime could harden on it. Doris, from Mabel's lunch, began leaving paper bags on the doorstep. She was a narrow woman with flour always caught in the crease beside her wedding ring. Wren would open the door after hearing her old Chevrolet leave and find biscuits wrapped in wax paper, sometimes stew in a jar. Once 2 slices of apple pie. The third time, Wren carried money to the cafe. Doris pushed it back with one finger. "Pay me in candles when the shop reopens." Wren had never said the shop would reopen. Doris returned to wiping the counter. That settled it. Caleb Mercer arrived one Saturday on a black Schwinn bicycle with a splitting maul balanced across the handlebars. He was 16, all elbows and serious concentration, with one front tooth chipped diagonally. "There is wood behind your shed," he said. "I know. My mother says you are cutting it wrong." Wren looked toward the stacked rounds. "I probably am." He split until noon. When Wren offered 2/4, he stepped backward. My mother said. "About your grandfather," Wren almost corrected him. Amos had not been her grandfather. Then she looked at the boy's hands closed around the maul handle and let the sentence stand. Reverend Boyd passed each morning at nearly the same hour. He wore a dark overcoat, shiny at the elbows, and had a white mustache so square it seemed trimmed against a ruler. He never entered unless invited. He tipped his hat. Sometimes he left kindling beneath the eave. Once, when Wren was carrying broken plaster outside, he stopped beside the walnut trees. "May good work remain." 4 words. Then he continued down the road. Wren postponed the cellar until February 11th. The trapdoor behind the rear bench opened onto 7 granite steps, descending into earth cold enough to preserve the smell of stone. Below lay a 12 by 15-foot cellar with a fieldstone floor. At its center sat one dressed granite slab, too regular to belong among the surrounding stones. A craft mark had been carved into it, the same open divider above a square that appeared behind the third walnut tree. Wren cleaned the grooves with a brush. She did not lift the slab. The letter had taught her something about restraint. On the third step, while clearing mouse nesting from the underside, her fingers touched oak. A small box had been wedged into a gap behind the stone. Inside lay a brass key. Its bow had been shaped like a cabinetmaker's divider. Beneath it was a tintype dated 1903. A young woman stood outside the same building when the clapboards were still painted, and the sign above the door was new. She held a cabinetmaker's marking gauge across one palm. Wren brought the image nearer the lamp. The woman had her eyes, not approximately, the same slightly lowered left lid, the same narrow chin, the same way one shoulder sat higher than the other. On the back, written in brown ink, "Clara Bell, daughter of Nathaniel Bell, age 25, summer of 1903. Wren read it twice. Elias's letter had named Nathaniel and Isaac. It had not named Clara. She carried the brass key upstairs and placed it on the mantel. She tried it in no lock, not the miniature cabinet, not the surviving display cases, not the doors. Some answers could wait without being lost. Snow retreated first from the south wall, then from the road. The creek became loud enough at night to hear through the repaired windows, brown water shouldering beneath the culvert, while walnut catkins lengthened overhead. Wren made one decision before April ended. She would not begin a full gun cabinet that spring, not yet. She would spend 1 coin from the cash on materials and practice with small samples. 1 mortise, 1 glass rabbet, 1 brass hinge fitted flush enough to disappear when closed. A person could inherit tools without inheriting mastery. She understood that now. The house was patient, so was she. 2 winters later, in December 2024, Wren completed her first full cabinet. It stood 7 feet 2 inches tall and was built from black walnut she had air-dried and checked until the moisture held near 7%. She fitted the doors before glazing them, then removed them, adjusted 1 hinge mortise by less than the thickness of a postcard, hung them again. The glass settled without pressure. 3 brass locks turned with the same light resistance. Inside, the cabinet held no rifles. It held Amos Bell's dividers, Elias's dovetail saw, the miniature walnut cabinet, and the leather safekeeping ledger. Wren locked the doors, then opened them, then locked them once more. Only after that did she call the work complete. The barn no longer looked abandoned. The white pine floor carried dark paths where boots had crossed it. Restored windows held winter light without rattling. Plaster followed the old walls instead of pretending they were straight. The drill press remained where she had found it. Cleaned, unoiled, unpainted. Wren had never tried to make the building young again. She had only made it sound. The brass key stayed on the mantel for another month. Its answer came during an ice storm. A dead limb broke from the third walnut tree and struck the ground hard enough to expose a narrow metal plate set into the trunk's oldest hollow, almost hidden behind a calloused ridge of bark. Wren cleared the ice. At the center of the plate was a keyhole. The divider-shaped brass key entered without resistance. 1 turn released a shallow iron door. Inside, protected by oiled canvas, lay a folded 48-star American flag. Beneath it was a note dated October 2nd, 1918. The handwriting belonged to Clara Bell. Thomas left for France with the 32nd Division and asked me to keep this until he came home. News arrived yesterday that he was killed in the fighting near the Meuse Argonne. Father says the flag should go to the church. I cannot do it yet. Thomas sharpened my chisels when my hands blistered, and never once told me cabinetry was no work for a woman. I am keeping the flag where the walnut grows over the north wall. Someday, perhaps someone will understand that keeping a thing is not the same as hiding it. Wren folded the note along its old creases. Clara had been the woman in the tintype, Nathaniel Bell's daughter. The lineage in Elias's letter had followed the men who inherited the shop. But the photograph showed something the ledger did not. A woman had worked here too. Her name had simply fallen out of the official telling. On November 11th, Wren carried Thomas Bell's 1918 medal to Greenwood Cemetery in Grand Rapids. She did not organize a ceremony. She found the Bell family plot using cemetery records, cleared wet maple leaves from the stone, and placed the medal there for the length of 1 quiet hour on Veterans Day. Then she returned it to the miniature cabinet. The flag remained folded, not displayed. Kept, of the money found beneath the drill press, Wren used 4 coins. 1 paid for the first walnut stock she practiced on. 1 covered replacement glass, 1 bought a better sharpening stone. The 4th paid a mason to inspect the fieldstone foundation after a spring thaw opened a crack she did not trust herself to judge. The $27 $800 remained untouched. Wren put it back into protective envelopes, wrapped the bundles against moisture, and placed them in a new locking box inside the old cavity. On the lid she fixed a walnut label for the next one. She did not explain who that would be, neither had Elias. The shop reopened without a sign in the newspaper. Doris solved that. One morning an index card appeared on the corkboard inside Mabel's lunch, Ellison cabinet and glass repair hinges. Locks, sash, small joiner asked Doris for contact. Wren removed it. Doris replaced it the following morning. Wren left the second one. By summer, more than 40 names had accumulated on a handwritten mailing list. Most people wanted ordinary work. A jewelry box hinge, a cracked cabinet door, a warped drawer, 1 church display case whose lock no longer caught. Wren accepted only what she could do honestly. She returned 3 pieces and said she was not skilled enough yet. Nobody laughed. Caleb came back in October. He was taller and had traded the Schwinn for a used pickup that rattled whenever it idled. He carried a long object wrapped in an army blanket. I made something. That sounds dangerous. It mostly was. He uncovered a walnut sign. The lettering matched the faint original sign Wren had found above the doors. Bell and heart-sporting cabinets, joinery and glass. Beneath it, Caleb had carved 2 new words, which at a daughter's. Wren looked at him. He had left the cutter marks visible inside the letters. Your spacing is wrong, I know. The ampersand is heavy, I know. You sanded across the grain there. Caleb pointed to the door. I can take it home. Wren carried the sign outside. They hung it beneath the original. For several minutes neither spoke. Then Caleb stepped into the road to judge whether it sat level, left side down a little. It is the road. It is the sign. They adjusted it. He was right. That winter, Wren began her own letter. She used Elias Bell's bench lamp and wrote by hand because typed words seemed too easy to replace. My dear one, whoever you are. She stopped there for nearly 10 minutes, then continued. She wrote that finding money had been simpler than deciding not to spend it. She wrote that a building could be repaired faster than a person learned to trust shelter. She included instructions for sharpening at 25 degrees before refining the secondary bevel, for checking walnut moisture before final fitting, and for never forcing glass into a frame that was not square. She wrote Amos's name, Clara's, Doris's, Henry Van Doren's, Mrs. Pruitt's, Caleb's. She did not write Director Vale's. Some doors did not need reopening merely because one had learned how locks worked. Years earlier, Wren had been sent outside with 1 canvas satchel because a ledger said she had reached the proper age. Now, another ledger rested beneath her hand. This one recorded repairs, names, measurements. Debts paid slowly. Kindness is not paid at all. On the final page, she copied one sentence exactly as she had first understood it. Sometimes the strongest wood is chosen simply to build a beautiful box that locks the most dangerous things safely behind glass. She placed her unfinished letter inside the miniature cabinet. She did not seal it, not yet. Outside, evening settled across Turner Cut, while light remained warm behind the restored windows. The walnut tree stood black against new snow. Inside, the drill press waited beside sharpened tools and unfinished boards. Vintage walnut gun cabinet, joiner's barn waits. It has always waited, and in the county clerk's office, years after Mrs. Eleanor Pruitt retired, one old desk remained in use. During an inventory, a younger clerk found a worn dollar bill flattened beneath a brass paperweight in the top drawer. Across its margin, written in fading blue pencil, were 3 words: Ellison Parcel, Hold. Nobody knew why it had never been deposited, so they left it there.